I'm going to bow out in a moment, but the two people who are speaking today are Doug Millard in London and Naoko Yamazaki, who is joining us from Tokyo. And I'll just briefly introduce the two of them. So Naoko Yamazaki is an aerospace engineer and, most importantly, an astronaut. And she undertook a mission in April 2010 on the Space Shuttle Discovery to go to the International Space Station. After retiring from JAXA, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, in 2011, she's been active in various other space-related roles, including being on Japan's Space Policy Committee. She's the representative director of Spaceport Japan Association, and she's also on the council of the Earthshot Prize, an environmental prize. And Naoko-san will be talking to Doug Millard, who is Deputy Keeper of Technologies and Engineering at the Science Museum in London. And Doug has produced many exhibitions about space, lectured widely, appears on television and radio, and has published several books on space. And he is currently working on putting together a new space gallery at the Science Museum, and also a major exhibition about Mars, which is planned for 2024. So I'm going to, I've forgotten about this, the timeline. Yes, we're going to wrap up, I think, fairly sharply at 1 o'clock. So please get your questions in early. But after a brief introduction by Doug, it will then be a conversation between the two of them. So over to you, Doug.
Thank you, James. Thank you for the introduction, and hello, everybody, wherever you are today. So we've got a very exciting hour, just under an hour to go, and we'll be talking, as James said, to Naoko Yamazaki about her amazing experience in space, which of course most of us don't get the chance to experience ourselves. So it's so important to be able to talk with astronauts such as Naoko. So before we hand over to our main business, which will be a conversation with Naoko, we'll have a very potted history of human spaceflight. So I'm going to try and share my screen now. So if you'll bear with me, and hopefully you will see the first slide coming up round about now. So I'm looking for a few nods that it's come through okay. And I can see James is nodding, Jason is nodding. We shouldn't really forget the first astronaut, first cosmonaut. It was Laika, the first animal in space. Laika flew in 1957. She didn't return, but it was all part of the intense research program that was leading up to putting a human in space. And the first one, of course, being Yuri Gagarin, the Soviet cosmonaut who flew into space in April 1961. Just a couple of years later, he was followed by Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman to fly in space. There were flights between those two missions, but Tereshkova leading the way for women spacefarers. July 1969, those of us who can remember it will never forget the first moon landing and the pictures being returned, the very grainy, black and white grey pictures from the moon as Neil Armstrong and then Buzz Aldrin took the first steps on another world in space. 1981, the first US space shuttle flew, and we'll be hearing more about the shuttle fleet from Naoko in a few minutes. That one was Columbia, and it was a test flight, the first which introduced the shuttle program, which flew for many decades. In May 1991, the first Briton flew in space, Helen Sharman. This was a collaboration between the Soviet Union and the United Kingdom government. And Helen flew to the Mir space station, a tremendous space station which flew for many, many years and caught many headlines during its existence in orbit. However, the space station we'll be focusing on today is the International Space Station, which started to be launched in 1998, and then many modules, including one which Naoko was involved with, were added over the subsequent years. And I should say, here in London, we had clear skies just a couple of nights ago, and I had a beautiful view of the space station passing overhead. So if you know that you're going to have a cloud-free night, do please look up on a NASA's website. There are many websites telling you where the space station will be flying. And if it's flying over where you live, you'll get a chance to actually see the space station, and not forgetting that there are astronauts on board that space station right now. Now, in recent years, we've been hearing a lot about the private space sector, the entrepreneurs, and the subject of space tourism. Dennis Tito is arguably the first space tourist, and he flew with the Russians in April 2001. 2010, so leaping forward a decade, we have the first commercial supply mission. That was 2010, April 2010. And that signaled a major adjustment of the US American sector, the US space sector, and how there was a far more equitable balance between the public sector, NASA, and the government institutions, and the private sector. In this case, of course, SpaceX. I just need to move my windows, otherwise I can't see my slide. There we go, that's better. And we come April 2010 to our guest speaker today. Naoko Yamazaki flew to become the second Japanese woman in space on the Discovery to the International Space Station. And we'll be hearing a lot more about that in a few minutes. And then bringing things really up to date, just a few months ago, we had the first all-civilian space flight. Again, this was a SpaceX launch up to the space station, September 2021. And sorry, that was a space flight, all-civilian space flight. And then just, well, hopefully in a few hours' time, Yazaku Meizawa will become the first Japanese tourist to visit the ISS. So there's a tremendous amount going on at the moment. We've been blessed over the decades with an astonishing history of human spaceflight. But you could say that we are now entering a new space age where more people can fly into space. And of course, there are far more missions being launched into space. So I'm just going to get my second of 3 slides, if I can. There we go. And hopefully you can see this slide, which just keeps things in proportion. There have only been a few hundred people that have ventured into space. You'll see the bulk have been American, but 123 Russians. And then we can see Japanese, Germans, Chinese, French, Canadians, and Italians. And then, including the 2 Britons who have flown into space, Helen Sharman and more recently Tim Peake, amongst the 35 other nationalities who have flown. So I'm going to, that's a very brief tour through the human spaceflight era. And to stop sharing and introduce Naoko Yamazaki. Naoko, hello, how are you?
Hello, Doug. Well, thank you so much for summarizing, the human space history. So beautiful. Thank you so much.
Well, I hope I didn't make too many mistakes. If I did,
No,
you were very noble, and you didn't point out my errors.
Oh, this is perfect. And it is my great honor to join in this webinar. So thank you, Daiwa Foundation, for the precious opportunity. And so nice to meet you all.
Well, it's a great honor to be speaking with you. And once again, despite the troubled times we live in, these technologies which enable these conversations are truly astonishing. So to everyone, please, as we speak with Naoko over the next few minutes, if you have any questions, please do use the chat function, and we'll start off. So Naoko, I was wondering, where did this all begin? What motivated you to become an astronaut?
Well, like many other astronauts, I was inspired by sci-fi movies like Star Wars and E.T. and Space Odyssey and so on when I was a child. But when, in my childhood, there were no Japanese astronauts yet. So I did not think of becoming an astronaut as my career. I was just, dreaming to, visit space someday. And then I knew about astronaut programs in the NASA and some other countries. And then gradually, there became a Japanese astronaut selected. Then, that's what I wanted to do. So all those, history and sci-fi inspired me a lot.
And so you felt, you knew that this was something that you wanted to do. How do you go about doing it? I think I'm sure there are some of us watching who would like to do what you did. So what do we need to do? What did you do?
Well, yeah, good question, because, when I was a student, I was not sure how I could become an astronaut, but I really like engineering a lot. So I first became an aerospace engineer, and I started working at the Tsukuba Space Center for the Japanese Space Exploration Agency. Then I applied to an astronaut call. But when I first applied, I failed it because I was, I didn't have much working experiences at the time. And on my second trial, I was selected as an astronaut candidate. And some of my colleagues, got selected on his third time. And some of my colleagues at NASA said, it was my fifth time and sixth time. So, they were very encouraging to, we can try many times.
Yes. And what do you have to do between, in your case, between the first and the second attempt, but other colleagues, they tried many times. What did they have to do between each attempt to do better the next time?
I think, gaining the working experiences is very important. And also, through these experiences, it's nice to have a leadership and followership and team building experiences. And international collaboration will be also vital. So those kind of experiences will, make you fit more to the astronaut call.
Something which is always asked is tests. Now, this is in regard to your application to become an astronaut. Later on, we'll come to the tests as part of training. But can you give us an idea of the types of tests that you had to undertake in order to qualify or to be accepted as an astronaut candidate?
Mm-hmm. Well, very good question, because right now JAXA, Japanese Space Exploration Agency, is hiring new astronauts the first time in the last 13 years, because Japan doesn't have such a big astronaut group. So the selection happens only 5-10 years. So it's not so often. But, whenever there is a chance, we are encouraging more people to apply for an astronaut call, because this time we are accepting not for the people of the STEM background, but for the non-science background people as well. So it is Japan's first trial. And also for the height limitation, is getting wider now. Usually it used to be 158 centimeters or 190 centimeters, but now 149 centimeters, 190 centimeters. So it's getting wider. And for the selection, it takes usually a year. And the first stage is a documentation check. And the first stage is for the paper test, including the STEM knowledge. And the second stage includes medical checks. It requires a couple of days, and we have to take solar medical checks from gastroscope to large intestine fiber test and so on. And also the interviews also are needed for the second stage. In the third stage and the final stage, I experienced a 1 week in a closed environmental chamber within the finalists. Usually 8 to 10 finalists spend 1 week altogether in that chamber. And we do individual tasks like typing, calculation, and even jigsaw puzzles, but no pictures, all white jigsaw puzzles and so on. And group discussions and group work for create Lego robots and so on. So it's kind of a psychological test. And of course, we need interviews. Interviews at Houston, NASA, and at Japan for JAXA as well. So it takes a whole year. And I think it's similar for the European Space Agency as well.
How did you get on with the being enclosed, being isolated? Was that a totally novel experience, or had you had some practice at being isolated?
Yeah, it's my first experience to be isolated without windows, without TV, no phones, and just 8 of us in a small space. But it was actually fun because we are all rivals, but at the same time we are friends to aim for the same thing, space. So we get very nice friends, and we communicate each other even now.
We have lots of questions coming in, and just to remind everyone, we'll go to these questions as best we can and in order a little bit later during the event. Just one more question about the isolation while we're on the subject. Were you able to follow the passage of time? Did you know when it was day, when it was night, or was that removed from you?
You mean during the isolation chamber?
Yes, during the isolation. Were you able to know what day it was?
Yes, because inside the chamber, there is no light. It's all artificial. So we rely on the watch. And usually we wake up at 6 a.m. and then light up in the room. And then at 10 p.m., we turn off the lights and simulate the night. So it's same as the International Space Station because ISS rotates around the Earth every 90 minutes. And looking at the outside, we cannot tell, night or daytime because we experience 45 minutes night and 45 minutes daytime. So it's very confusing. So we do the same thing, artificial 24-hour day. And we set that time at the Greenwich Standard Time.
Thank you. If we could move on to the training itself. So you are now a candidate, you are starting or you're well into your astronaut training. I think we know that it involves all manner of different lessons, training, all manner of different activities. I'm afraid this is the obvious question. What struck you as the hardest? What was the most challenging? What was really, really difficult?
Oh, yes, good question. So let me share some slides, if you don't mind. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so the training takes years. Becoming an astronaut is not a goal. It's just a beginning. And then it takes years of training. So for me, I had training for 11 years to get to space. And because Japan doesn't have its own manned spacecraft, all the training happened in Houston, Russia, and the ISS partner countries. So we have to travel a lot. But I actually enjoyed traveling. So that was my fun part. But the hardest thing is to keep motivation because there is no guaranteeing when I could fly to space. And nobody tells me when is your target day, X day to go to space. It's unknown. So we have to, rely on, we have to, trust each other, and we have to believe in ourselves. So keeping motivation is the hardest thing.
I think you have some more slides as well, Naoko. Were there some more?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Doug. So this is, my favorite training called National Outdoor Leadership School, NOLS, in the Wyoming. And this is a team building training. And the training, through the training, we learned leadership, followership, and the self-management and situational awareness. And we cannot do it from the beginning. We have to accumulate all the small experiences. So this is one of the training for the team building. And it is not only for astronauts, it is for the students or teachers or, entrepreneurs and the businessmen, even congressmen as well. So various people got together, and in nature, we have to help each other. So that's why it is a good environment. And also almost 80 or 90% of the training is how to deal with unexpected things like emergency. So we did survival training in the winter, in the forest, or in the ocean, and so on. And we have to, learn about how to deal with the computer damage or power loss and air depletion and so on. So those kind of training, was very helpful. And not only the training, but we have to do the jobs, the ground jobs to help each other. So this is the picture of me helping Takao Doi, a senior astronaut who joined in the assembly mission of the ISS. And I was, the communicator, capsule communicator, Capcom, in the flight control team. So in that way, we help each other. And so this is a mission profile. And I spent 15 days in orbit, and 13 crew members, including the 6 long duration crew members, were spent all together in the ISS. And we delivered Leonardo logistics module, and I operate a robotics arm. And after install it, we deliver each scientific experiment onto the specified location. It weighs about 1 ton, so it's a big, like a car, but still in the microgravity, it's easy to carry the big items. So thanks to the microgravity. All right. I think that's pretty much, yeah.
So it's a shame we only have an hour. There are so many questions, but perhaps now we're in orbit, we could just talk a little bit about your experience in space. So there is one description which some of our listeners, our viewers may have heard of. It's called the overview effect. Now, there is some debate as to whether it exists or it doesn't, but my understanding is that for some, it means that when you go into space and you look down on Earth, then something changes as regards your perception and understanding of life, existence, everything. Is there anything that you can relate to with that? Did you experience anything profound when you were in space?
I think so, because before going to space, I consider space as a desirable or a miracle and a special place for me. However, once I reached space, like this, and especially in the microgravity, there is no absolute up and down. So sometimes we look up the Earth like this. It is very astonishing view. So I realized, wow, it is the Earth that is special. It is the Earth that is miracle. So I changed my perspective by 180 degrees. So it's kind of an overview effect.
Fascinating. And as regards the, if you like, the physiology, our bodies, I mean, our our frame, our human frame, is designed for living on Earth. Whenever we leave Earth, our human body, complains. So were you aware of changes to your actual physiology or your body during the mission and when you returned to Earth?
Mhm. Yes, of course, there are some body changes, like, and you get taller in space because in spaces between spines get longer in microgravity. And you have a chicken legs, but you have a full-moon face. It's due to the fluid shift. And due to the fluid shift, your brain considers there are plenty of water in your body. So you have to release a couple of some fluid by urine. So in space, your body fluid is about 80 to 90%. So your skins get dry easily. And also what else? Oh, recently we found, about 40% of the long duration crew members have difficulties to focus in space and even after coming back to the Earth. And we don't know the mechanism yet, so we have to consider it.
That sounds slightly frightening and terrifying, but fascinating nonetheless. Maybe we could use that to think about the future of human space flight, and particularly going to Mars, which is a perennial subject of interest. We know that there are the NASA, ESA, there's the international program around Artemis to go back to the moon with humans, and then ultimately to reach out to Mars. What are your thoughts about the challenges of humans going to Mars, not least because of some of what you've just described, the effects on the human body and of course the mind as well?
Mm-hmm. The International Space Station is very close to the Earth, just 400 kilometers above. And if something happens, the medical issues or emergency for the spacecraft, then you can return to the Earth within 24 hours. But for the moon, it takes 3 days to go back to the Earth. And for Mars, it takes at least 6 months to come back to the Earth. So we have to be more independent and autonomous for the moon and Mars exploration. And also for the Mars exploration, there is another difficulties because we have to consider about the planetary protection. Because on the moon, we consider no lives exist. But for the Mars, probably maybe, some lives like small bacteria may exist. So we don't want to, affect Mars environment from the Earth's bacteria. So we have to, sanitize all the equipment to bring to Mars. And we do for the Mars rover. And so if human beings go to Mars, we have to care about the planetary protections. Then we have to make steps by step. So that's a hard part as well.
So I'm going to ask a very unkind question, and that is, could you speculate on when humans might actually reach Mars? Would you care to give an approximate date?
Oh, well, I'm not sure, but probably within 10 years, it could happen. Or, within 20 years, definitely.
And the major, if there was one single major challenge for the astronaut going to Mars, what would you say that was? We know that there are many, but what would be the main challenge, would you say?
Oh, good question. Probably just one way, it's not so hard, but for the return to the Earth, it's probably harder because we need other spaceship, and also we have to wait until the good timing to go back to the Earth. Comes once every 2 years. So for the round trip takes more than 3 years. Then we have to, make a sustainable space agriculture instead of bringing all the space food, or you have to recycle water more efficiently. The ISS is recycling water, but the ratio is about 60-70%. But we have to make it close to 100%. And the space radiation, it's probably going to exceed about, life, tolerance limit. So you have to protect somehow. And yeah, the medical issue, if something happens, we may do some, operations on Mars, so how we should do it. So those kind of challenges we have to solve.
Well, it sounds intimidating, but when we consider what has been achieved in, 60 years, 1961, the first human space flight, and particularly in the 60s when we moved from Earth to our nearest heavenly body just in a matter of years, it shows what can be done. So I suppose it's a question of where there's a will, there's a way. Before we move on to some of the questions from our participants, I was wondering if you could say, Naoko, please, a little bit about your current activity and involvement in space. What are your projects? You mentioned the project you were working on, Earthwatch. So perhaps you could say a little bit about your current work.
Okay, thank you, Doug. My current activities include the Space Policy Committee and the Space for Japan. And we are creating the 4 commercial spaceports in Japan, including Oita and Okinawa, the horizontal spaceports like a Cornwall in the UK, and in collaboration with the Virgin Orbit and our Japanese startup companies, and 2 vertical spaceports as well. And also, I am a member of the Earthshot Prize Council, together with Prince William and Her Majesty Queen Ranier and so on. So it is my honor, because I really respect Prince William's leadership to initiate this Earthshot Prize. It, restore the environment of the Earth within the next decade. Air, water, and nature, and waste-free and climate change. And this year, Prince William announced the first ever award winners, and from the more than 750 nominated from all the continents. And there is a book about the Earthshot, and I contributed to the Clean Our Air section. And this is a picture from the first award ceremony. And the 15 finalists include from individual, city, companies, and the government. So a 15-year-old girl from India was one of the finalists, and she gave a very inspiring speech at the COP26. And also the Milan and Costa Rica was also within the finalists. And the Japanese startup company's water, which recycles water at 98% of the recycle rate, is one of the finalists as well. So this is current my activities, because, I saw the Earth, I really, impressed with the dynamics of the nature, but at the same time, the power of civilization, power of human beings. So if we unite our strengths together, probably we can achieve a big goal. And at the same time, Earth is very fragile, like this picture. The atmosphere, the layer is very thin. It's a skin, paper thin. And this is the sun, it's very powerful. And if this is ours, of course, but we collect all the water from oceans, rivers, and glaciers. It's just this amount, very small. So the Earth itself is spaceship. And of course, everybody's on the spaceship Earth. And I hope, we can unite our strengths to restore the environment of the Earth. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Well, that's fascinating, and quite apart from those views of Earth, both from relatively nearby, from Earth orbit, but also the Earthrise, which some of us remember from Apollo 8, 1968, and the power of the imagery has almost grown with the years. so that it's all part of our understanding of what's going on with our planet and why Earthshot is so important. We should say as well, perhaps, that space and largely satellite technology has played and continues to play a crucial part in understanding how humanity has affected Earth and how we can monitor the changes and how we can actually start to correct what has been going wrong. So space is so important on so many fronts, isn't it?
Yeah, I totally agree. When I saw the Earth from space, the Earth looks alive, but the Earth doesn't have its own eyes, ears, nor legs and arms. But we have a technology to send satellites or even human beings to space and to watch the Earth from space. Then probably we are playing an important role of the Earth's eyes and ears. So we need to, work together. We need harmony between human beings and the Earth.